There's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
Hello and welcome to Mamamia Out Loud, what women are actually talking about on Wednesday, the 26th of June. I'm Mia Freedman and I'm in the driving seat while Holly is away today, so strap in.
I'm Jessie Stevens.
And I'm Gemma Buff. I pop into Mamamia Out Loud from time to time nowadays.
When things need to be explained to us in particular.
Exactly.
And on the show today, speaking of things we need explained, everyone's talking about WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who has today made a deal, as we're recording, to finally be released from prison. And by the time you hear this, he should have landed home in Australia. And if you're confused about what it all means, we are going to give you a top line so that you can feel smart without having to actually read anything about it.
I wouldn't mind knowing how to feel about it and maybe developing some sort of opinion. Because at the moment, I'm a bit confused.
I'm hoping we'll have an opinion by the end of it. Plus, are you a rememberer or a forgetter? I've already forgotten what this segment is about, but I'm sure it's going to be fascinating. Apparently, I wrote this part down. Being a forgetter is far easier, so that's good news for me. Who am I? Again, who can say? And did Kim Kardashian just say the quiet part out loud? She claims that she only has 10 years left of looking good, and we need to unpack what that means for the rest of us. But first,
In case you missed it, you are not imagining it. You're freezing. And that's because Australian homes are among the coldest in the world, according to the World Health Organization. So this Canadian TikToker named Alexandra Tui said in a video recently that even though she comes from Canada, where, we're talking minus 20 sometimes, she has never been so cold as living in a Melbourne share house. She says the coldest I've ever been is living in a Melbourne share house in the middle of July and laying in my own bed trying to sleep and being able to see my own breath while only being able to warm myself with a tiny space heater and an electric blanket. Apparently this is because Australian homes are poorly insulated with inefficient heaters, which are incredibly expensive to run, particularly at the moment. In Tasmania, for example, the average temperature inside a home in winter is 11 degrees. And in Melbourne, 1 in 4 homes are under 14 degrees.
I have a theory about why this is.
Are you going to say put on a jumper? Because I do not have any
Thanks,
time
Mum.
for that. Just put on another layer.
Put on another layer.
Oh, no. I think it is because we are in denial in Australia about the fact that it is ever cold.
I agree with you.
That's
yes.
why you can go down to Sydney's particularly bad at this. I was going to say Bondi, but anywhere really in Sydney, people will be wearing thongs and a beanie.
I disagree because I lived in London for 2 years. Obviously, it's incredibly cold over there in winter.
Yeah.
I prefer the winter over there to here.
Because everyone knows it's winter, so no one's pretending it's summer all year
because
round.
our homes are freezing.
Yeah.
My husband went to sleep last night. We've got a doona, a blanket, a sheet, all the layers. He was wearing a hoodie with the actual hood on.
Yeah.
While he was sleeping.
Do you have a heater?
The thing is, my son has 2 heaters in his room.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
Well, he's hogging them.
but I would prefer he sleep through the night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I be cold.
Fair.
That's what we do in our house because it's like I'd prefer my son to be warm and the rest of us just shiver it out.
Our house is so cold.
It's so cold.
It's like, and we'll put heating on, although it's very expensive, so you kind of try not to. But it's like there's always a draft coming from somewhere. It feels like there's no insulation in your walls. It's not built, like I was in Ireland recently. The way those homes are built, on a cold day, it is incredibly warm inside, and the World Health Organization says it should be minimum like 18 degrees inside a house for you to be healthy because mold grows, because there are physical effects. And also they said no one wants to have people over because their house is too cold.
I don't think our windows are sealed properly.
No, my window is like I feel like my tongue would stick to it if I went anywhere near my window.
But then what are you supposed to do? Because I just got my energy bill and I gasped. It was in the 500s.
It's insane. It's insanity.
So what, do I just get another few heaters in my house? Like, we can't afford that.
I know.
Out loud as we want to know, how do we stay warm? Should we just put on a jumper and harden up?
And thoughts and prayers to Tasmanians.
Yes.
Now to our breaking news, and Julian Assange is just hours away from being a free man.
Everyone's talking today about the release of Australian journalist, is he a journalist? And founder of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, from prison today. After more than a decade-long legal battle, today Assange faced a court in Saipan, which is a US territory, but it's like a little island somewhere.
It's US territory, kind of like Hawaii. It's American soil, but it's not actually in America.
He pleaded guilty to one count of conspiring to obtain and disclose national defence information. So basically, he pleaded guilty to the charge of espionage. As we're recording, Assange is due to arrive in Canberra. He's meant to touch down just before 7 p.m. tonight. Gemma, when I woke up and saw this everywhere, I tried to understand what was going on, but I found that every report assumed a lot of knowledge and sort of started in the middle of the story. And I'm going to be honest, I don't care a huge amount about this man, but I realise it's big news. Can you please explain it to me like I'm 5 years old?
I think we need to go back to the start because, as you said, this story is so incredibly long. I think I've been in journalism since 2012. I've reported on this story pretty much every year of my entire career because it's just been around forever. It starts in 2006. Julian starts a website. It's called WikiLeaks, and he basically takes anonymous kind of leaks of information and publishes them.
And what was he before that? Was he like an academic? Like, what was he?
A hacker.
He kind of got his start hacking, which I think then hacking had very different connotations to what it does now.
Well, I think he was actually known that he was coined as like Australia's most prolific hacker.
Was he hacking for good or evil? Who knows?
Well, it depends. It depends on, and I think that the answer is probably both. When you're a hacker and you get, and this is the question of whether just a massive data dump is journalism or not, because from what I've seen, he got all this data and then he shared it. He believes in transparency. That had impacts where there were things happening that we should have known about. So things that the US military were doing in Iraq. Yep, great. There were other things that led to civilian deaths potentially. Or
because they were released by WikiLeaks, information about informants in certain countries.
Yeah. Or like I think there's questions about collusion with Russia. Like it's all very, very weedy, but he's a hero in the eyes of some and villain in the eyes of others.
To explain what happened next, so he does all of these big dumps, as Jessie mentions, of all of these kinds of data leaks. So things like one of the big ones that you remember is 90,000 classified documents related to the war in Afghanistan.
So do we know where those documents came from, where he got tens of thousands of documents about like classified US military information?
Yes, a woman named Chelsea Manning, she worked for the US Army. She leaked a number of documents to Assange and she ended up serving 7 years for her part in that.
Before she was pardoned by Barack Obama.
Yeah. And then in terms of what Assange has been facing, in 2010, an international arrest warrant was issued for him, but it wasn't for the leaks. It was for sexual assault charges.
I remember this now. This was two women in Sweden. Who said they'd had sex with him and he'd removed the condom without their permission. Is that correct?
Yes.
But then some people said that they were like
plants.
Yeah, to just get him off like onto different soil so that they could arrest him or something.
Well, that's what Assange was worried about. He was worried that those extradition kind of orders were basically going to get him into America to face espionage charges. So that is why he went to the Ecuadorian embassy in London and said, help me. And they took him in for 7 years.
And they did not know what they were getting into.
And they didn't like his company.
They had no extradition treaty and essentially he was safe there. I read some really interesting stories about what his life was like there because he was kind of like the house guest that just never leaves. So he had like some rooms there and all random celebrities would come and visit him, like Pamela Anderson, who he was rumoured to have had a relationship with. He fathered several children while he was there over those 7 years.
2 young kids. He fell in love with his lawyer.
But then they got sick of him being there. So he would I learned all this on the quickie this morning. He would be like riding his skateboard up and down the corridors. He then at one point smeared excrement all over the walls.
Yeah, I did. That stuck in my head.
Yeah.
That's not appropriate for a house guest.
Sounds like a housemate from hell, from your early 20s.
So then they wanted to kick him out, right?
They did kick him out.
All right.
They kicked him out and then he was arrested.
Yeah, they kicked him out. He was arrested after 7 years of being in that embassy. And his health and his mental health was not good. And there was that vision of him being like carried out, sort of kicking and screaming. And then what happened to him?
So he was arrested and that is when America kind of pounced. They had an extradition order. They charged him with conspiracy to attempt to hack a computer in connection to the 2010 leaks and 17 other charges. So they basically wanted to put him in prison.
At this point, what's happening with Sweden? Because I just feel like they pop up in news stories and I'm like,
no one talks about that anymore.
Rape? Is he not guilty or were they just dropped?
They've been dropped.
Those charges have been dropped. And to understand, because it was very confusing, there were the people that were like, free Julian Assange campaign. And then there were people who were like, look, we're not a big fan. We don't really think he's a journalist. Taking a whole lot of stolen documents and throwing them on the internet does not make you a journalist. And then I thought Barnaby Joyce, actually, I can't believe I'm going to quote from Barnaby Joyce. Have a listen to what Barnaby Joyce explained, because in the last couple of years, a lot of Australian politicians, including Kevin Rudd, Barnaby Joyce, from all sides of politics, have become involved in petitioning the US government to free him. And this is why. Here's what Barnaby Joyce explained.
It was not really an issue about Mr. Assange. If you asked me, do I think what he did was morally correct? No, it wasn't. But the issue for me is extraterritoriality. This was an Australian citizen. He was not a citizen of the United States. He was not in the United States when this felony, as what they said, was created. He did not steal the information. That was then Bradley Manning, who is now Chelsea Manning. He was not the first person to publish this information. That was a gentleman, I believe, the name of Doyle from Cryptomania, who first published it. And if the dissemination of this information is a crime, then every person where I now stand in the Parliament of Australia's fourth estate is on their way to the United States of America because you all printed it.
So what Barnaby Joyce was saying, if I'm correct, is that it's the fact that America shouldn't have been able to extradite him and imprison him because
he didn't make the leaks, he just reported them.
Well, he just shared them. He just distributed them. I wouldn't say he reported them because taking a whole lot of information and throwing it out there is not reporting and it's not journalism. There's got to be a degree of checking and I don't know, like some people say governments have to be able to have secrets. Other people say we should know all the information that's available in the world.
Well, it probably sits somewhere in between, but I think it's important to reflect on some of the things that Julian Assange did leak. And he revealed a lot of, things that were happening that we ought to have known about. There was a war in Iraq where, tens of thousands of civilians were being killed. He had video footage of that. It was horrific. And I think that led to further scrutiny on what was happening. It kind of changed geopolitical relations. If it weren't for Julian Assange, the story that we would tell would be very different. And I do think probably that history will look back on Julian Assange as a really important figure who shone a spotlight on some, dark times in humanity.
I think maybe he just got a bit carried away.
Yeah, I agree.
He seems fairly unlikable. But I'm terrified to say anything about Julian Assange and WikiLeaks that's negative because I remember back in 2012 when Mamamia was, in its infancy, we published a piece around this time about Julian Assange that was very negative. I think it was an opinion piece. It was around the sexual assault charges from Sweden. And I don't have a lot of memories of it and I can't go back and check it because soon after it was published, the website was hacked and that story was removed and deleted from all our servers. Wow. There was no trace of it left on the internet.
Did they touch anything else?
Nothing else.
It's the thing about hackers.
That is weird.
I know.
And it's not like it was necessarily, Julian Assange sitting at his computer. It's like a community of hackers who have control over the internet and they scare me.
And WikiLeaks is pretty powerful, or it was pretty powerful. It's now been a long time, so I'm not sure. There's a lot of people who've also come and gone from his camp, a lot of people who believed in the principle of what he did, but then perhaps became a bit disillusioned when they actually met him.
And a lot of people as well who were very critical at the beginning then looked at the time that he has spent there. This is why it's so impossible to form an opinion because there are people I look at where I go, your opinion I value. Okay, Julian Assange, hero. And then I think your opinion I have never agreed with in my whole life and you're calling him a hero, especially in the US. Like, because there's this thing about press freedom, but then there's also this thing about never mess with our military. There's just really weird conflicts going on. But this is Joe Biden had something to do with it. Is that right?
Yeah, ultimately it was Joe Biden who said we will do a plea deal. So the plea deal was he had to plead guilty to espionage, but he would then be not pardoned, but the time he's already served, they would go, okay, well, you've served your time, which is probably as much as, if not more than, for example, Chelsea Manning did. Therefore, we will allow you to go home. Now, does he then have to come home and serve some time in Australia? What happens when he lands tonight?
He's a free man.
A proper free man.
A proper free man. So as we kind of record, he is basically touching down in Canberra. So he's a free man tonight. He's meeting his 2 children for the first time, not as a incarcerated or soon-to-be extradited person.
Because he's been in solitary confinement in a maximum security facility for 5 years and 7 years in the embassy before that.
It's 1,900 days in confinement, and a lot of it was like 23 hours a day, just, not seeing sunlight.
His wife and 2 kids arrived in Australia a few days ago. They're going to be waiting for him at the airport, and apparently they're going to go sightseeing.
He is going to need, apparently his health isn't great, and so that's probably going to be the number one priority. But it reveals a lot of things and a lot of interesting philosophical arguments about free speech and espionage. The thing I was interested to learn was that the Espionage Act allows no public interest defence. So it's like all espionage is treated equally, whereas if it really is in the public interest and if something really bad was happening and it did need a whistleblower to go, people need to know about this.
But isn't the definition of public interest subjective? So some people might say, well, we really needed to know about that because these bad things were happening. And then that same piece of information that showed us that might also have exposed people who were informants and secrets and might cause diplomatic problems and change the geopolitical situation. I mean, governments and diplomats do need to be able to have confidential conversations, you would think.
Not when it comes to abuse and rape
No,
and
I don't
torture.
mean about that, of course.
Like Guantanamo, I think was a big one.
Of course. But I think in the process, and this is why the difference of public interest and journalism and just taking a whole lot of stolen documents and dumping them unfiltered onto the internet, what is the moral and ethical responsibility of doing that? And then I also see the argument of, well, if you get to decide, who gets to decide what we need to see and what we don't? So if you're looking for a really simplistic, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing that he's free? Listen to Claire Murphy, the host of The Quickie. She interviewed today Kim Statton, who is the writer and director of the trustful Julian Assange documentary. And here's a little grab to leave you with. Claire asked Kim what would happen to Assange now that he's back in Australia.
Do you think we'll see him become the man who addressed the world from the balcony of the Ecuadorian embassy again, or is that man gone now? Are we looking at an Assange who might fade away into obscurity from this point?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think his supporters really hope that he will get back into action, and admirers of his work and supporters of WikiLeaks would hope that that's possible for him. But I think we can also have compassion and understand that it's his decision of whether he wants to return to work and how soon he will return to work. If he decides to do that, I would imagine as soon as he touches down in Australia, he'll be going to a hospital because he'll need a lot of treatment, PTSD and various health conditions. I would guess that it would take, a long time, a year, maybe longer, to recover and even think about going back to work.
This month, Mamamia turns 17. We know birthdays aren't all that exciting when they're not, your birthday. There aren't enough presents. So we want to take this as a chance to give you a treat and say thank you for being on the ride with us.
Right now, you can get $20 off a yearly Mamamia subscription with the code OUTLOUDBIRTHDAY.
The offer is valid till the end of June, and you will find all the details of how to do that in the show notes. Enjoy. My friends.
According to an article in The Cut, there is an existential divide between rememberers and forgetters, and a debate about which type of person is better off. So the science says that there are actually 2 extremes. On one side, you've got SDAM, and that stands for people with severely deficient autobiographical memory. Then you've got, on the polar opposite end, HSAM. They're highly superior autobiographical memory people. Now, this isn't about dementia. This isn't about photographic memory. This is just about how your memories, personal experiences imprint themselves into your brain, right? Some people
I think about that Inside Out, the first movie Inside Out. Remember there's that filing system?
Yeah.
And they go, which is like the memory, and they go looking through the filing system. So I often think about my brain and my memory like an animated movie.
So for the highly superior autobiographical memory people, they don't forget much of anything. And if you give them a date or a year in their conscious lives, they can pretty much remember what was happening, right? Interestingly, people with this type of memory tend to be more miserable. They hold on to things, they ruminate. Those with deficient autobiographical memories are happier.
Me.
Bad things don't stick to them.
No.
And they're not emotionally pulled into the past.
No.
Rememberers and forgetters tend to team up. They like each other.
Ooh.
They like each other a lot. Rememberers are often better in arguments because they have a lot of evidence to pull from.
I hate it in an argument when someone goes, and you go, you always do that. When was the last time I did that? I don't remember.
Yeah. I'll be having an argument with you, Mia, and I
Terrible.
can often say, no, we tried that 3 years ago and it didn't work. And you'll be like, really? It doesn't actually matter if it happened.
Yeah.
Bitch can't remember anything.
She says it with confidence, and I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, well, I'm a forgetter, so I can't be trusted.
It's like in performance reviews where you have to remember what's happened in the last 12 months.
yeah.
I'm blank. I've got no idea.
No.
I can't remember yesterday.
No.
Well, I am obsessed with this story because I'm a textbook rememberer and I remember on behalf of other people, and I see it as an absolute curse because I have to keep grudges for people because I can't have you making missteps when I've got to go, this
You're my
person
grudge
wronged
keeper.
us. Yep, I'm very, very good at that. I have like it's not so much for like information, but anything with any emotional link. It is there.
Yes.
And I'm also an incredibly nostalgic person. And I think I'm nostalgic because of how vividly I remember the past, like from tastes to smells to even when I was away recently, it's like I can remember being 19 and going to Europe for the first time and like it's so clear to me. So I can get very stuck in the past and feel the passage of time. I think it's the saddest thing in the world. Like I'm stuck in the past. What I want to know is if you're a forgetter, what are you thinking about ever?
I'm anxious for the future. I'm anxious about things that haven't happened yet. I don't remember the past. It's not that I'm not a ruminator because I am a ruminator. Like I can obsess about things, but I'm a terrible, like I have the memory of a goldfish.
Does that worry you?
It used to. When I was diagnosed with ADHD, I discovered that that's one of the symptoms, being very, like forgetting things. Because you're just always jumping, and I'm jumping forward. I don't jump back.
Because I am married to a forgetter and I have found myself deeply offended by forgetters because I think you just don't care. So I'll remember every little detail about, Luca and what he likes and this story he told me and whatever. And then it'll get to my birthday or something about primary school or some story and Luca's like, I think he doesn't care enough to remember.
Yes.
And it's important. This is what I loved about this article was that it's not his fault. Forgetters can't help it.
What's interesting about this also is that you would assume, knowing you and your husband, for example, he's incredibly meticulously organised and efficient and productive. You are woefully disorganised. So it doesn't correspond with what you would think. Like you would think that the organised people will be the rememberers, but it doesn't necessarily work
I don't think
that way.
remembering is efficient. Gemma, what are you? Where do you land?
I am Luca. I am Luca. Because I am very organised and I can remember, I know in my head exactly what I've got planned for the week in terms of appointments, times, where, when.
Oh, I got none of that.
I have no memory of a few years ago. And I was trying to think of an example. The thing that scares me the most about it is the idea of me forgetting my loved ones when they pass. I think about this all the time.
It's all right. You've got lots of videos.
That's why I take lots of photos and videos because I lost my Oma, my grandma, a few years ago. I can't even tell you what year. I don't know what year it was, even though she's one of my favourite people in the world.
But why is that important?
Because I can't even remember if it was 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago.
But isn't it her? See, that's a different thing. So I've also got time blindness, which is another symptom, which is I find time very slippery. I don't know if something happened 6 months or 6 years ago. I don't know if it's going to take me 10 minutes to do something or 4 hours. the whole construct of time is kind of impossible for me to get my head around. But I want to ask about your Oma. Do you remember her?
I remember things like her smell, her hairspray, the way she used to dance, but I don't remember our conversations. I don't remember those kinds of details. I don't remember. My best friend is a rememberer, like textbook. I can say to her, do you remember that 2015 trip we did to Mexico? What did we eat on the second day when we were in Tulum? And she'll be able to tell me the drink, the food, what we did after, what she was wearing, what I was wearing, what temperature it was. And I look at her like she's crazy. I would have not a clue, even though that was one of the happiest times of my life.
Yeah.
I think it's better for you, and it's survival and evolution that you would, because even with grief, right? And this came up in the article that they said that's a tension between people who are, and in fact, forgetters love rememberers when it comes to grief. Because they go, can you remind me of what we did? Because a rememberer will be able to say, well, what we did chat about or whatever was blah, blah, blah.
But I'm sad I can't give that memory.
Yeah.
I'm sad I can't remember exact conversations with my Oma. I can just remember her essence.
I have a theory that the reason I'm a rememberer is because of revision. And I say that because in the technicality of how memory works is that the thing happens and often it's not imprinted until it is revised. That's like how homework works. As a twin, most of my experiences are recounted within 24 hours to someone else. And I think that means that I'm living it twice at least. Because I'm a talker, the people in my life as well who aren't talkers, they're not revising their own memories. But because I wonder if people who keep journals, for example, have better memories because they've revised the experience.
Right. So, and then in the act of remembering, I've once read that if you imagine it's like going and pulling out a file and looking at it and then putting it back. And each time you pull out the file and remember it, in the act of remembering, you change it a little bit and then you put it back.
It's why when you think of memories from your childhood, they'll weirdly correspond with an exact photo.
Yes.
You're remembering the photo. You're not remembering, you're then attaching a memory to it.
Sounds like you have a sensory memory, Gem. Like
Maybe.
You remember her smell, the way she dances. So I think that perhaps there are different types of memory, like visual memory. I also think that things that have a strong emotion attached to it, you're more likely to remember. So for me, anything around shame, I will remember in detail. Other things I can let go very, very fast. So that's the good thing about being a forgetter. You don't get stuck.
Yeah. Whereas you do as a rememberer. And there's such useless information that you walk around for the rest of your life. So I remember it was a few years after school and I was saying something to a friend and I brought up someone from school and she was like, nah. And I said, she was friends with blah. Nah. Just it had erased from her memory. And I remember feeling judgmental and going, or actually thinking she was pretending to have forgotten it as a way of being like, I don't think about that anymore. I reckon I could name the 120 people I went to school with who were in my year easily.
Oh, my goodness.
But that's why it's weird for me because I think I could name everyone in my high school year, but I couldn't tell you details like what was in my HSC. Like I can't, I have a very patchy memory.
Which I think everyone, I think the patchiness is normal and it's about recall because everyone's had the experience of.
You also have to clear out your hard drive. Like I consume so much information on a daily basis. There isn't enough room. So things have got to be cleared out. Now, it's unfortunate that the things that are cleared out are like my children's mobile phone numbers. That's a shame. And what year Mamamia was started. But I also just don't care.
Yeah.
Like memories that that's what I mean about I've got a very efficient filing system. Like I'm not interested in the past. Everyone's like, oh, Mamamia turned 17. I'm like, I don't care. I care about what we're doing next year.
And it's why you'll sometimes say.
But that's why you're a leader.
Yeah, you'll often say
Thanks
things
for spinning
like.
that positively.
You'll be like, we've been doing Out Loud for 85 years. And I'm like, that's not true. But you're not a liar. You're just an idiot.
Feels like 85 years.
Yeah.
It's true.
See, I actually didn't even realise I was doing this until we talked about this topic. But I have been trying to become a rememberer. Ever since I gave birth, I have been keeping a diary, which I Haven't done since I was a child.
That's not a remember, that's a documenter. Which
Because
is a
I want to
good-
be able to remember.
It's a good fix though.
So a few weeks after birth, I was adamant. I was like, everyone give me space. I need to write down everything that happened or I will forget. I will forget. And even now, I haven't gone back and read it, but even birth now, 18 months later, it's very blurry. I don't really remember the details of it.
I have a question. I also think, firstly, we consume so much more information, so there's less room for it to be stored. I don't know if that's how brains work, but it feels like it should be how brains work. And also, I've literally forgotten what my second point was.
This one, Luca always says that he only remembers the useful stuff, and he finds it useless to remember why he's...
I've remembered. Has the internet and Google and all the things, you don't have to remember things anymore. It used to be you have to remember what happens because you have to make a heart memory of this moment in this holiday. Now it's I'll take 50 photos with my phone.
Yeah.
And also I don't have to remember anything because I'll find it on Google. I don't have to learn something for a test because I can always find the information. So have our memories become flabby from lack of use?
That worries me. I want to keep my brain agile, and that's why when I get sent a PIN, a security PIN, I will never copy and paste. I'm like, no, Jessie's going to remember the six numbers because I'm not going to become lazy.
I still remember my childhood phone number of my house.
Yep.
I remember the phone number of my best friend from when I was 7, but I don't know my own children's. Any of them, their phone numbers now.
Me too. I don't know my husband's, but I know my family.
Because you don't have to. Back then, the only way you could know a phone number was either to write it down or to have it in your brain. So the one you would remember them. Now you don't have to know anyone's phone number. You just
I feel
put
like
it in
this
your
is
phone.
an evolutionary thing that persists over time because the world needs every village, every little community needs rememberers and it needs forgetters. If you just had a village full of rememberers, oh my God, it'd be Eeyore.
It'd be very petty.
Everyone would it'd be petty. No one would be talking to each other.
Wouldn't be a
Everyone
lot
would
of forward
crying.
momentum.
No, there'd be no innovation.
Is your twin a rememberer?
Yes, 100%.
So you're both rememberers?
For the same reason probably, because she also just tells you.
Because we tell and then we go, our only thing is that often we forget who the memory happened to. So I'll tell a story about something that happened to me and she'll go, this is the thing about rememberers as well. Are we always entirely correct? Maybe not. But I will tell a story and Claire will go, that happened to me. And I'm like, oh, did it? Oh, that had filed into my memory as me.
That's another thing I remember. Stories are easier to remember than facts. Like random facts, if they're not attached to a story.
No, see, I can't. I'm not good with random facts.
Yeah, they're not. So some people are, but I don't know. That's
But
a different
forgetters
skill.
often say they're terrible storytellers because they say, I can't tell a story. I don't have any of the details. A good story is about the random, specific details.
2 other things before we go. Let's see if I can remember them both. The first is that COVID really messed with forgetting and remembering because it was such a weird time and because it was like being put on pause for 2 years or so, a lot of people are very slippery around time. Like I've never been good with time, but COVID really messed with it.
I have black holes around COVID. Something happened during COVID.
Yeah, so even for the rememberers, that's interesting. Yeah. And the second thing when we first started talking about this and I said I was a forgetter, you say, does that worry you? Your implication, I assume, is are you worried it's early onset dementia or Alzheimer's?
No. I meant does it worry you that you can't remember? That would make me really anxious.
Really?
To go, oh, hang on, I can't remember this specific detail or I can't keep up with my grudges. But
I am really worried about getting early onset dementia, especially because it's in my family.
So here's some news for you. I interviewed a woman called Kerry Catane who's written a book about her mother who got early onset Alzheimer's and she was only in her early 50s and she talks about the first time she really noticed they were out shopping in a shopping centre they'd been to all the time and then her mother couldn't remember where her car was. And I interrupted her when she was telling the story and I said, that makes me panic because every time I go to the shopping centre or anywhere I forget where my car is. And she said, but no, then that's what you always do. The reason that she remembered this happening to her mother, that particular time and why it stood out as a red flag is that her mother was not that person. So her mother was not a forgetful person. It was completely out of character. So that's just a little note. We'll put a link in our show notes in case anyone's – because this is what anxiety is. I'm forward thinking and panicking that you said I'm not worried about that. I'm like I'm very worried about our futures. Mate, that forgetters maybe live in the future more?
No, I'm worried about the past.
Great. I'll put a link in the show notes if you can remember to what was I going to put it? No filter.
And Outlouders, I want Outlouders to jump in the Outlouders Facebook group and tell us, are you a rememberer? Are you a forgetter? Which one is better? And why do forgetters piss you off? Because I would like you to. They piss me off. They piss me off.
Every Tuesday and Thursday, we drop new segments of Mamamia Out Loud just for Mamamia subscribers. Follow the link in the show notes to get your daily dose of Out Loud, and a big thank you to everyone who is already subscribed. Friends, Kim Kardashian says she has 10 more years of looking good, and then she's going to have a rest.
How old is she in 10 years?
53.
How old are you?
I am 52.
When are you 53?
In a few months.
Okay, so you have a few months.
Your time is up, Mia.
TikTok.
You're out.
No more Met Gala for me after October. She says every year she wants to do something that challenges her, and that acting is a challenge. That's why she started acting. But she's not willing to cut out anti-wrinkle injectables. And she really talked about it in terms of she has to work so hard to look the way she does. But she's only, it's so interesting, she says it as a binary, she's only going to do that for 10 years. And then her line in the sand is clearly, at 53, what's even the point?
What an interesting age. What happens to you at 53? Are you going to turn into a toad?
I don't think she's particularly like, it's 53. I think she's like, I've got about 10 years, I've got about a decade. But so she's in her early 40s.
Where I can keep this up.
She basically sees early 50s as game over. Like, don't even try. And that's interesting to me as well, because I always think about those women like Kylie Jenner and a lot of women now who start fucking with their face early, and anti-wrinkle injections and filler and all of those things that were once seen as something you did 40 plus or 50 plus. What happens when you are at that age? Like, because you can't, I mean, do you keep trying to turn back time?
I look at her face though, and
Indefinitely?
she's 43, and I was watching the interview where she talked about this. And the only way you can describe her is ageless. There is
Ageless.
no sign of aging anywhere
Can't
on
really
her face
pick
or
her
body.
age.
No. And it's not even that she looks young.
I'd say
It's
the same
just-
for Kylie Jenner.
They could be the same age.
Yeah. I would
Yeah.
have no idea. And so it's, to me, it's...
And Kris Jenner, who's 20 years
True.
older again.
But that's offensive to Kris Jenner. Because Kris Jenner's doing great things. She was in a music video a year ago.
And that's Kim just being like, nah, over the hill at 53.
But we can't blame Kim, because this is the society we live in, where women have been taught that in Hollywood they've got an expiration date.
So what she says in the latest episode of The Kardashians, she's got this plot line that revolves around her pitching and eventually selling a comedy movie to Netflix. And I think it's the one that my friend Brina Papandrea, producer of Strife, is doing with her. And she revealed that she's got a 10-year plan for her newfound acting passion. Here's what she said.
I can do a movie a year. I've got about 10 years where I still look good. So that's all I've got in me. And then I'll take some time off. So 10-year plan, guys. That's my 10-year plan.
And her point is that she feels the need to lay off the injectables so that she can show more emotions. Like, she was like, how am I going to cry? How am I going to be scared out of my mind? I cannot move my face, so how will I act? And then she's saying she's not willing to do that because she's got to make the most of this next 10 years to look young and hot.
Is it about looking young and hot, or is it about just being a bit tired? Because from
Yeah.
that, I kind of felt like
Yeah.
she had 10 years of go before she was like, I'm
she's
tired.
more like, I've got 10 years. Well, yes, but go for her involves selling her face and body, like, because that's what she does. She's got all of the, her brand is, she's got all these businesses. She's a billionaire, but her brand is how she looks and reinventing herself and, looking a certain way, and whether it's the Met Gala or whether it's in what she posts on Instagram, that's her brand.
It's interesting that looking forward, even Kim Kardashian needs a finish line. Like, she needs to see that somewhere in the future she can have a lie down and stop with it all.
Take off that corset.
The work involved in the acting in the movie a year, that's one thing. To me, the thing that's making her tired is the work that is going into her appearance, which would be all the imagine the exercise, imagine the diet, imagine the hours and hours and hours every day sat in hair and makeup and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's almost like she's saying, I've got 10 more years left in me where I can keep this up. And then what? The mask comes off?
It's almost like she's set an impossible standard for herself.
Yeah.
By creating this kind of hyper version of herself.
And by extension for other women.
Exactly.
And the fact that how she has to look as a brand, as Kim Kardashian, is so contrary to what's required to be in the movies and make TV and actually act. That's really interesting because it's not just about her, it's about every actress, right? Every A-list actress. To be good at acting, you have to have a face that moves. You have to not look like you're 32 and ageless perennially.
Well, the best actors in the world, I was thinking about Margot Robbie in I, Tonya, and how that was undone. And in order to inhabit that role, she needed to put her vanity to the side. Charlize Theron in Monster. Like, there are lots of examples of women.
Yes, and that's why they get Oscars.
Yeah.
But I don't think Kim's going to be doing those kinds of
Well, Nicole
movies.
Kidman, what she wore the prosthetic
nose.
nose. But the interesting thing about all of those women and the time in their career when they did it, including Renee Zellweger and Bridget Jones, any kind of beautiful woman who has to downplay or ugly herself for a role, the awards love it. The Oscars love it. People love it. But they all do it when they're in their 30s or their 20s. I mean, Bridget Jones, Renee Zellweger, and, look, the fact that that was sold to us as being plus size is extraordinary. It was all when it was not really how they looked.
So they could cosplay as ugly because then when they got their award, it was like, well, you made yourself so ugly, but you're actually so hot.
Correct.
And that's why you're a good actor.
Correct.
But I reckon this is the underappreciated value of not caring about your looks or never really considering yourself good looking. Because her saying, I've only got 10 more years of looking good, I'm like, oh my God, I've never thought about it like that. Like I never was 20 and went, my looks will fade. And I look at beautiful people around me and I go, it must be really stressful for you that it's probably at some stage going to go downhill.
You probably don't follow any supermodels on Instagram.
No, I don't.
It's really interesting because I feel like the people who struggle with this the most obviously are models, so women who are famous specifically.
That would genuinely be
just
stressful.
for the way they look. And their Instagrams are all throwback pics. And then there'll be an occasional one now, but barely, and only if they look almost the same and they're heavily filtered and heavily airbrushed. And I look at Elle Macpherson and I feel exhausted.
Yeah.
That would genuinely be really hard.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Oh, no,
if
I
your
agree.
whole existence was reliant on how you look, and we know that our looks change.
Aren't we lucky?
We're so lucky.
If you never feel that you look good, then you never got on the treadmill and you've never got to press stop. You just get to sit there and have
But I don't
Are we
think
feeling
that's true.
sorry for Kim K?
No,
Is that what we're doing?
I actually, of course, that's not true because don't tell me that every single woman doesn't struggle with aging. It's the soup we swim in. We all swim in these beauty standards, ironically, that are imposed by these women whose incomes depend on it, but they're the setter of the beauty standards, unfortunately. So even though our incomes don't depend on it, we still feel shit about ourselves because we don't look ageless. We don't look like Kim Kardashian at 43.
Yeah,
we don't
but
look like Kris Jenner at 65.
43-year-old women who, and I don't want this to sound judgmental, but who are doing careers that have nothing to do with how they look, are not worried that they can't work in 10 years.
They're not worried that they can't work in 10 years. I agree. But do they look in the mirror and go, oh, of course. I mean, maybe they don't. Hopefully they do. But I think we all compare ourselves subliminally to these beauty standards that are imposed by these women whose brands.
Yeah, I think it's our job to just go, I fundamentally don't see my value as tied to how I look. And
So
I think
logical.
we can,
That's a very easy thing to say. It's a harder thing to actually do.
Outlouders, in case you missed it, I came back from travelling this week with my baby Luna for the first time, and there was a hospital visit, some translation needed in French supermarkets, as well as some glorious highlights. And we talked about all of that in a subscriber episode, which we released yesterday. There was one thing I forgot to tell you that I thought you would really enjoy. A little tidbit. When I was at this Irish wedding, I was dancing with this random Irish guy who had had 45 Guinnesses, and he started dancing with me. And as you would know, I can't really dance. And then he was just looking at me like there was something wrong with me, which there is. And then he came over to me later and he said, dancing with you is like dancing with a squid. And I thought, Mia would really appreciate that. I really liked the squid analogy because I thought it is, because I don't know which way I'm
What
going.
does that even, how does a squid dance?
I guess like this.
Yeah, like he was trying.
Out Louders, if you want to see Jessie dance, we actually made a video this week that's gone a little bit viral. It was Jessie's idea. She noticed that American men at Taylor Swift concerts and British men, i.e. Prince William, at Taylor Swift concerts dance differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so we demonstrated how American men move versus how British men move. You can go see that on our
Out
Instagram.
Louders are
It's
pretty
very funny.
clear who their favourites are, and let's just say it's the Brits.
There was an episode that you wanted to get involved in when you were away. It was about monologuing, wasn't it?
I loved this so much. Last Wednesday, you did an episode about the trend of being monologued at. There was some frustration shared. If anyone wants to listen to that, just go back into your feed. What else did you talk about in
We
that
also
episode?
talk about daddy energy.
And Megan and her jam. Yes, yes.
Yeah,
The
Megan and
jam.
jam. But the daddy energy, lots of people are talking about daddy energy. Is it creepy? Is it – see, I think your husband's got daddy energy.
Oh.
This is just weird.
I don't know
Yeah,
if your
that feels
husband's got
sexual.
daddy
It
energy.
already feels really sexual, doesn't it?
It
It
should be
feels-
sexual because he's your husband.
Well, not sexual to you
And
because
your
you're his
son.
mother.
I don't want to do – Out Louders, that's all we've got time for today. God, poor Jess. Holly's going to be listening to this and she's going to go, never again. I'm not leaving. Listen to what they do. They're talking about their weird family shit. A big thank you to all of you for listening to today's show and still being here if anyone is still listening. We will be back in your ears tomorrow if we remember. Bye.
Bye.
Shout out to any Mamamia subscribers listening. If you love the show and you want to support us, subscribing to Mamamia is the very best way to do so. There's a link in the episode description.